Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Monica Alba in Washington, where the world is waiting to see if President Trump follows through or backs off on his public threat to wipe out Iran and its people, unless Tehran opens the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. Eastern Time, less than 4 hours from now. The threat prompting fear from both Democrats and Republicans, as well as from world leaders and officials in the Gulf region, that the war could spiral out of control. Two U.S. officials tell NBC News that the Pentagon has prepared options for the president that include targets in Iran used for both military and civilian purposes. It comes after a stunning post on social media this morning with the president warning, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran doesn't make a deal by his 8 p.m. deadline. That follows the president's comments yesterday that every bridge in Iran will be decimated and every power plant will be exploding, never to be used again. Today, Vice President Vance took a more moderate tone during a press conference in Hungary, suggesting there were multiple off-ramps to avoid catastrophe.
I hope that they're smart. The president has set a deadline for about 12 hours from now in the United States. We're going to find out, but there's going to be a lot of negotiation between now and then, and I'm hopeful that it gets to a good resolution. The president of the United States is a man who recognizes leverage, that if the Iranians want to exact a certain amount of pain, the United States has the ability to exact much, much greater pain. The president doesn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. That's why we're negotiating so aggressively. But fundamentally, the ball is in the Iranians' court. We feel confident that we can get a response, whether it's positive or negative. We're going to get a response from the Iranians by 8 o'clock tonight. I hope they make the right response.
Iran's state media releasing these images today of what they say are civilians responding to the government's call to form human chains around power plants and bridges throughout the country ahead of possible strikes. In a brief phone call with NBC's Gabe Gutierrez just moments ago, the president sharply criticized those calls for human shields, calling them, quote, totally illegal, and saying, quote, they're not allowed to do that. As the clock counts down, we should note that the president has extended his deadline for Iran to reopen the strait multiple times. It started more than 2 weeks ago with a post on social media saying Iran had 48 hours or the U.S. would obliterate its power plants. 2 days later, the president announced a 5-day pause on those strikes, citing good and productive talks with Iran. And 2 days after that, he pushed the deadline another 10 days to yesterday at 8 p.m. And then on Sunday, he moved it back one more day to today. Yesterday, I asked the president about the possibility that tonight's deadline could move yet again. Mr. President, since you did move the deadline back a couple of times, are you prepared to move the deadline back again?
Highly unlikely. They've had plenty of time. In fact, they asked for 7 days. I said, I'm going to give you 10. But at the end of 10, all hell's going to break out if you don't get there.
Joining me now is NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs Correspondent Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. NBC News Senior National Security Correspondent Courtney Kube is with me on set. NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons is in Riyadh. And also with me is NBC News Business and Data Correspondent Brian Cheung. Thank you all for being here to start us off. Kelly, I want to begin with you. What do we actually know about how the president is spending the day today with this major deadline looming? And what are we hearing from the White House about what might come?
Well, good afternoon, Monica. And certainly the White House is aware that there is a clock running toward the deadline the president set. And we've seen that the sentry is at the West Wing door, meaning the president's in the working spaces of the West Wing. But we don't know a great deal about how he is processing this information. As you alluded to, our colleague Gabe Gutierrez got him on the phone briefly, and that gave a brief window into his thinking where he was very critical of Iranian citizens who are engaged in protest in advance of this deadline. Now, that is notable in part because there have been many times in the run-up to this that the president has talked about expecting that Iranians would at some point be in the streets to protest their regime. We've gone from help is on the way, part of a early social media post before these events unfolded, before the military campaign against Iran, to today's threat, which has certainly rattled many in Washington, where he's talked about the death of a civilization. Quite a bookmark of those two different sentiments. Also, the White House is giving us just a glimpse where Caroline Leavitt is telling us that the deadline is at 8 o'clock tonight. She released a statement where she goes into the specifics here, that the Iranian regime has until that Eastern time. That's at about 3:30 in the morning in Iran. They are 7.5 hours ahead of East Coast time. And then notably here, only the president knows where things stand and what he will do. And as our colleague Gabe Gutierrez is trying to assess that, whereas others on our team have been trying to get a sense of what movements in the preparation, planning, and conversations may be going on. It is inscrutable at this moment. And we've seen the president in places like this before, where he's made very bellicose threats, and then at times he has carried them out, and at times he has pulled back. And it is just a tense time because of the extraordinary nature of the president's words. And even being asked about what did he mean about that, we've heard him describe some of his most provocative social media posts or comments, and basically saying he's intending to set a message or kind of leaving it up for everyone's interpretation. And that is, in some ways, a part of the chaotic way that the president likes to keep adversaries off balance. Monica?
Yeah, tense time, Kelly, with such charged rhetoric. I want to ask you about that specifically because the president is getting a lot of backlash from that post where he did say, quote, whole civilization could die tonight. We did see Chuck Schumer call the president, quote, an extremely sick person. The House Democratic leadership said the president is, quote, completely unhinged for saying that. And even Marjorie Taylor Greene, who used to be an ally of the president's, called it evil and madness. So is the president or the White House at all concerned about the optics of using that kind of language, Kelly?
There's no indication of that yet. And in the 10, 11 years of the president being on the national stage, there have been many times when he has said provocative things. What stands out about this is that the range of people responding to it, there is often a lull of people letting some of his controversial comments go by the wayside. And in the first term, it was, well, the tweets speak for themselves. Now these posts on Truth Social or whatever, you have lawmakers who sometimes just don't want to be pressed to respond to it. And in this case, we're seeing a very vigorous response from mostly Democrats, but also notably one Republican House member is saying today that he is concerned about the fact that this is a call for the end of a civilization, that is not in the American way, that is not a part of American values, and that wartime may be filled with lots of complicating, difficult situations, but that kind of rhetoric reaches beyond. So there's definitely pushback to the president's positioning on this. Monica?
Kelly, thank you so much for starting us off. I do want to turn to Courtney now. As we discuss the potential here, there have been so many discussions around whether striking Iran's civilian infrastructure could constitute a war crime. What are you hearing about your sources about what kind of targets are under consideration?
Yeah, and the reason that that's such a topic of conversation is because striking civilian infrastructure can be seen as a war crime. It violates the law of armed conflict. It violates the Geneva Convention, and it's an international against the law internationally. So there are cases, though, where the U.S. and others can make the case that something is a valid military target. And basically, it's sort of like a dual-use facility. So let's say that it's an electrical power plant that services the civilian population, but also plays a direct and distinct role in supporting the Iranian military, the Basij, the IRGC, whatever it is. And then the question is, will the U.S. find justification for striking some facilities like that? We're told that the Pentagon has already drawn up plans for facilities just like that should President Trump decide to move forward with these threats he's been making.
Court, you've been reporting for weeks now about the additional assets and resources that have been sent to the region. So what is the sort of current U.S. posture if they do decide closer to this deadline to act on it?
They're absolutely ready. If the president decides that, I mean, and think it's the language he has used. We've been talking about this charged language, but it has been charged about the possibility of these sorts of strikes for days now, with him saying that the U.S. would be able to obliterate all of this civilian infrastructure in a matter of a few hours. Well, that's a tall order. But the reality is the U.S. has so much military might forward that they could do a lot of that. And it's not just that. They can also bring additional assets. We have seen a lot of bombers that have been moving, and these are these big aircraft that carry big, heavy bombs. In some cases, they're massive ordnance penetrators. They can dig down deep and sort of blast through rock and things. They've been bringing them over from the United States for days now, and dropping bombs. So if the president decides to go through with this, the military can do it.
And overnight, we saw more action specifically on Karg Island, right? Talk about the significance of that, what was hit, and why was it different, or was it not that different from how they were hit the first time?
Yeah, I was really struck by when their first reports started coming out about potential U.S. military action on Kharg Island, because as you know, a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. carried out a bunch of strikes on Kharg Island. That's, of course, where Iran has its oil and gas infrastructure, a significant amount of it. The first round of strikes several weeks ago was all against military infrastructure there. And we were told that there were upwards of 100 targets that were struck, and they did a ton of damage there, maybe even taking out the vast majority of their military infrastructure on the entire island. So it was a little surprising to hear that they had taken more strikes. Most of these were restrikes. So they went back to the same locations. And in many cases, it's things like bunkers that are buried deep underground. They struck them several times, maybe the first time over the course of days or even weeks, with intelligence that comes in and they realize they didn't actually destroy the target. So then they'll go and they'll re-hit them. We were assured that the strikes were all along the northern side of the island. They were military targets like these bunkers and air defense systems. But I was really struck by, when we were asking questions about this, how U.S. officials were so adamant to say they were not targeting Iran's oil infrastructure with these strikes. It was solely going after the military targets. And that continues to be, as of this moment anyway, 4:11 p.m. Eastern time, that the U.S. military continues to go after military targets inside Iran as of now.
Until that potentially changes. Again,
it's hour by hour right now.
And wait, Courtney Kube, thank you so much for your expertise on all of this. I do want to go to the region now, to Keir, and I want to check in and see what is the mood like as we get closer to this deadline where you are, Keir.
Bracing themselves, I would describe it as, here in the Gulf. I think particularly I'm in Saudi Arabia, where they have been able to defend themselves pretty effectively, pretty successfully, albeit that, for example, a petrochemical plant was hit today, according to the government. So strikes are having an impact. But I think for countries like Kuwait and Bahrain, Kuwait, for example, closer to Iran, so just think about it, they have less time to intercept missiles and drones. I think it's a real concern that the Iranians have threatened to respond so drastically and to target civilian infrastructure. Not that they haven't already been doing that. They have been across the region, but that they are saying that they have been, in the Iranians' view, holding back up until now, and that they won't hold back any longer. I do think there are questions about just how much capacity Iran has to strike the Gulf after we've seen weeks of it, and they have targeted, for example, desalination plants, and it hasn't had a devastating impact. So I do think there are those questions, but certainly it is a nervous time here.
Absolutely, Keir. And we did get some breaking news just in the last hour or so from the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who said that he had specifically asked for President Trump to extend his deadline for at least 2 weeks. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told NBC News that the president has been made aware of the proposal and that a response will come. So do you view that as a sign that there could be some kind of last-minute deal here to avoid major escalation? Is that how you take it?
There's no doubt there could be a last-minute deal. I think we should keep in mind what the president himself said yesterday, which is that they're having to pass handwritten notes, or at least written notes, and not talk electronically, because clearly Iranian leaders will be worried about being struck if they are communicating electronically. So I think we should be a little bit skeptical about exactly how much progress Pakistan has actually made. That being said, Qatar, just talking today, their spokesman, outlining how important they think it is, Qatar thinks it is, that there is a deal. Take a listen.
This is why we have been urging all parties to find a resolution out of this, to find a way of ending this war before it spirals out of control. The continuation of this war in this way will only mean more costs for the people of the region, for the international peace and security, for international economy, for international energy markets, and there are no winners in the continuation of this war. There are only losers, and the net of losers is expanding every day as a result of the ramifications of the economic situation.
Look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There are two parts to this. One is President Trump's and Israel's threats against the Iranian economy, and then the other is trying to regain the initiative around the Strait of Hormuz. They are different. And the second point is about the potential for the US to take islands in the Gulf. I think that's still not off the table.
Keir Simmons in Riyadh. Keir, thank you very much for your reporting. We just talked about the diplomatic path here, potentially. I do want to turn now to the economic side of all of this and to Brian Cheung. Brian, markets just closed relatively flat on the day. And as we now wait and see what could happen in the next few hours, what are markets anticipating? What does that tell you?
Yeah, Monica, the markets have had a whiplash of a day. If you rewind to earlier in the morning, it looked like we were going to be set for a deep red day on Wall Street. The S&P 500, the Dow Jones down about 1% over the concerns that there would not be a resolution by the time we get to that deadline. And then as you see on the screen ahead of you, we actually ended the day positive on the S&P 500, just barely so, about 0.1%. The Dow Jones down only 0.2%. Nothing particularly crazy on that front, but it all seemed to do with the developments over the final hour of trading in just the last hour that you were talking about with all of our colleagues in the last few minutes about the optimism that perhaps the commentary coming out of Pakistan could at least provide the United States with some sort of resolution before this 8 p.m. deadline. So from the perspective of investors, at least, it does seem like there is some hope that there could be some resolution before the market opens tomorrow, because, again, markets did close 16 minutes ago. But, again, that's a bet, and we'll have to see.
And against that backdrop, oil prices do continue to rise. So if the president does follow through on his threat tonight, potentially, what's your expectation specifically for oil futures?
Yeah, well, look, they have continued to rise is kind of the big story over the last few days, but there was some price action even since that Pakistan post that did point to optimism in the oil markets as well. Crude oil prices were something a little bit closer to $117 earlier today. You can see on the screen ahead of you, the settlement was a little bit closer to $112. That decline over some of these headlines, but Monica, I mean, this just underscores the volatility that we've seen within the same day. You can see these huge price swings up and down. It's pretty binary. If there is an off-ramp to this war, you see oil prices go down and markets go up. If there doesn't look like that off-ramp is going to be there, well, then you see oil markets go up, prices a barrel go up, and that also means markets go down. And, of course, all of that has ripple effects to us at the pump as prices on an average basis do breach $4 a gallon for everyone out there.
That's the bottom line for the consumer. Brian Cheung, thank you so much for bringing us that perspective.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.